In today's world, it is difficult to imagine that truly empty and wild places still exist. Satellites have photographed almost every corner of the planet. Roads, settlements, and aircraft have reached places that were once completely cut off from the outside world. But mountains have always formed natural barriers, and a few ranges have resisted almost everything humans have built around them. Some still contain unclimbed peaks, poorly mapped interiors, and valleys where no recorded expedition has ever passed. So I invite you to join me on a journey through the last truly empty mountain ranges on Earth, places most of us could never realistically reach, but thanks to Google Earth, we can still explore them from above. And as the list goes on, each range will become more remote, more difficult to enter, and increasingly empty. Number 8 rises inside one of the Sahara's most dangerous border regions, and preserves definitive proof that this desert was once green. Number 5 was discovered by accident in 1966, when climbers standing on another summit noticed an unknown skyline 70 miles away. And the final mountains are literally called the Executive Committee Range, which sounds more like an office department than mountain range, and it could actually be the emptiest place on Earth. But for now, let's begin with mountain range number 9. We begin in western China, where the Altun Mountains rise across a high-altitude wilderness with no cities, almost no permanent roads, and barely any human presence. For hundreds of kilometers, the landscape remains empty. This is mountain range number 9. On Google Earth, the strangest thing about the Altun Mountains is not what appears on the map, but what is missing. Across this enormous protected wilderness in western China, there are no cities and no ordinary network of roads or settlements. Instead, the landscape is managed through scattered ranger stations and patrol tracks that cross some of the highest and most isolated terrain in Asia. The Altun Mountain National Nature Reserve covers about 45,000 square kilometers, or 17,400 square miles. Its average elevation is roughly 4,580 meters, or 15,000 feet, where the available oxygen is only around half of what it is at sea level. The entire reserve is managed by a team of only about 70 people. Some rangers travel more than 400 kilometers during a patrol. In summer, marshes can turn the journey between stations into a multi-day operation. In winter, temperatures can fall to minus 40 degrees. But this is a strange kind of emptiness because the absence of humans has allowed almost everything else to thrive. More than 65,000 Tibetan antelope and around 12,000 wild yaks are believed to live here, alongside wild asses, snow leopards, brown bears, and wolves. Rangers have described watching antelope herds moving across the plateau with wolves following quietly behind them. The landscape itself changes between alpine lakes, volcanic ground, ancient karst formations, and one of the highest deserts on Earth. So the Altun Mountains are not empty of life. They are empty of us, and that is exactly why so much wildlife still survives here. From the high-altitude wilderness of the Altun Mountains, we now travel thousands of miles west to a dark mountain massif rising alone from the Sahara. There are no towns around it, almost no water, and hundreds of kilometers of desert in every direction. This is mountain range number 8. Jebel Uweinat means Mountain of the Little Springs, which is a strange name for a mountain rising from one of the driest regions on Earth. It sits exactly where Egypt, Libya, and Sudan meet, appearing on Google Earth like a dark island surrounded by hundreds of kilometers of open desert. There are no towns on the mountain, no public roads crossing it, and almost no regular human presence. Its peaks reach roughly 2,000 meters or 6,600 feet, but the most interesting part is their shape. Uweinat is almost 2 different mountains joined together. The western half was formed by volcanic activity and curves around an ancient crater, while the eastern half consists mainly of sandstone plateaus cut by dry valleys. Today, the surrounding desert receives less than 100 millimeters or 4 inches of rain in an entire year. Some parts of the massif support almost no plant life at all, but hidden inside its caves and rock shelters is definitive proof that the Sahara was not always like this. Thousands of prehistoric paintings and carvings record people and large animals living here when grasslands and reliable water covered parts of the desert. Even the rocks contain traces of rivers, wet sediments, and ancient organisms from landscapes that disappeared thousands of years ago. That is what makes Jebel Uweinat so unusual. It is now one of the emptiest mountains in Africa, but its stone walls preserve the memory of a time when this desert was full of life. From a mountain preserving the memory of a greener Sahara, we now travel across the Atlantic to the storm-battered edge of Patagonia. Here, temperate rainforest, deep fjords, and huge fields of ice surround a mountain interior that remains almost completely cut off from normal human access. This is mountain range number 7. Cordillera Sarmiento sits only about 60 kilometers or 37 miles west of Puerto Natales, one of Patagonia's main tourist towns. Yet from a human point of view, those 60 kilometers might as well be an ocean. The range is a narrow peninsula of jagged rock towers, glaciers, and temperate rainforest, surrounded on 3 sides by fjords. Reaching it overland is considered almost unthinkable. Expeditions normally arrive by boat, cross rough seas, force their way through saturated forest, and then climb onto ice fields that are hidden inside cloud for most of the year. The first climber to explore the range later wrote that after reaching the mountains, his first task was simply to see them. During a 45-day expedition in 1992, the team experienced only 4 days they considered genuinely good. One tent was blown away. Storms trapped the climbers inside a snow cave for 5 days, and the wind once lifted a 220-pound man and threw him to the ground. The weather also explains something strange about the maps. For decades, not a single feature inside Cordillera Sarmiento had an official name. Climbers had to name the peaks, glaciers, and lakes themselves as they slowly explored them. The surrounding fjords have a long Coescar history, but the glaciated mountain interior still has no permanent settlements, no roads and valleys where no documented expedition has ever walked. Cordillera Sarmiento is not empty because it lies impossibly far away. It is empty because Patagonia has built a wall around it, using forest, ocean, ice, and almost constant storms. From the storm-battered fjords and glaciated towers of Patagonia, we now cross the Pacific to western New Guinea, where an isolated block of limestone mountains rises beneath dense tropical rainforest. Its interior is separated from the island's main mountain chain, with no roads, no towns, and large areas only recently studied by scientists. This is mountain range number 6. The Kumawa Mountains look less like a mountain range and more like a solid block of rainforest dropped onto the western end of New Guinea. They are separated from the island's main mountain chain by broad lowlands close to sea level. There are no roads through the high interior, no permanent settlements, and almost no trails. Beneath the forest is porous limestone, so rainwater often disappears underground instead of forming rivers. Even in one of the wettest environments on Earth, an expedition can struggle to find water. That isolation has preserved an ecosystem scientists had barely studied. Before the 1980s, the birds living here were almost completely unknown. Only a handful of ornithologists reached the upper forests over the following decades. Then, on the final day of a 2014 expedition, researchers caught a small black and white bird with yellow-washed feathers that none of them recognized. It became the satin berrypecker, only the second new bird species formally described from New Guinea in roughly 80 years. Scientists returned in 2017 and spent another 22 days in the mountains. They found only 3 more individuals. All 4 birds ever captured were male. The female has still never been identified, and even the species' song remains unknown. That is the best measure of how empty these mountains are. In a world mapped by satellites, the Kumawa interior remained isolated enough to hide an entire bird species until the 21st century. And even now, half of its story is still missing. From a rainforest range that hid an entire bird species until the 21st century, we now cross the Pacific to Alaska. Here, sharp granite peaks rise above enormous glaciers in a region so overlooked that climbers only discovered the range by accident while standing on another summit 70 miles away. This is mountain range number 5. The Revelation Mountains have one of the most accidental discovery stories on this list. In September 1966, 2 climbers reached the summit of Kachatna Spire, roughly 70 miles away. As the sun went down, they noticed a completely unfamiliar skyline of jagged blue peaks in the distance. They had not traveled there to find a new range. They simply looked in the right direction from the top of another mountain. The following summer, the first climbing expedition flew into the Revelations and landed directly on a glacier. The landscape was so dramatic that the team gave peaks names, including the Angel, Golgotha, Apocalypse, and the Four Horsemen. But the strongest evidence of how empty this place was came when their replacement pilot arrived. He was flying an aircraft he had never handled before and located the camp using little more than an X marked on a large-scale map. When he saw the glacier, he thought the landing area looked too short. He only committed after noticing 4 climbers running along it to show him where to land. More than half a century later, expeditions are still making first ascents here. In 2019 alone, climbers reached several previously unclimbed summits and even discovered that one supposedly minor peak was higher than the mountain beside it. The Revelation Mountains are not hidden in an unknown continent. They are in Alaska. Yet they remained overlooked until the 1960s. And even today, reaching them usually means landing a small aircraft directly on the ice. From a mountain range discovered by accident from another summit, we now travel far north into the Canadian Arctic. Here, sharp peaks rise from Ellesmere Island, more than 500 miles beyond the nearest permanent community, in a landscape reached only by rare aircraft, scientific teams, and heavily planned expeditions. This is mountain range number 4. The British Empire Range sounds like a place that should be covered in monuments, roads, and old government buildings. Instead, it rises across northern Ellesmere Island, only about 550 miles from the North Pole. Its highest summit is Barbeau Peak, at 2,616 meters, or 8,583 feet. But reaching it begins long before the climb. You first have to fly to Resolute Bay, then charter a ski-equipped Twin Otter into Kootenay National Park. A return flight to the park currently costs around 70,000 Canadian dollars, and landing deeper inside costs even more. In 2017, one expedition landed directly on the ice cap near Barbeau. The climbers reported that the topographic maps were unreliable, useful satellite imagery was almost non-existent, and their compasses pointed southwest toward the magnetic pole. Even the exact location of Barbeau Peak remained confused for decades. Different expeditions placed Nunavut's highest mountains several miles apart on the map, until a team used GPS in an old summit register to confirm which peak it actually was. The strangest part is that unclimbed summits still stood beside it. The 2017 team completed several first ascents within sight of the highest mountain in the entire Canadian Arctic. The wider landscape contains archaeological evidence of people traveling through it for thousands of years. But today, the mountain interior has no towns, no roads, and almost no routine human presence. The British Empire once covered nearly a quarter of the world. Its mountain range is almost completely empty. From the British Empire Range, where even maps and compasses can become unreliable, we now cross the Arctic to eastern Greenland. Here, the island's highest mountains rise directly from an enormous ice sheet with no roads, no settlements, and access that once required aircraft, dog sledges, boats, helicopters, and supply drops. This is mountain range number 3. The Watkins Range contains Greenland's highest mountains, but for most of human history, nobody even knew they were there. The range rises from the ice-covered interior of eastern Greenland with dark peaks appearing above the glaciers like islands in a frozen ocean. There are no roads, no settlements, and no practical overland route through the surrounding ice. Gino Watkins first identified the range from an aircraft in 1930. 5 years later, another expedition finally reached it and made the first ascent of Gunnbjørnfjeld, Greenland's highest mountain and the highest summit north of the Arctic Circle. But the best demonstration of how empty these mountains are came in 1969, when 6 explorers tried to find a route into the range from the north. They began with a charter aircraft, continued with dog sledges, switched to a small boat when the sea ice broke apart, and then hired a helicopter because traveling farther across the surface became impossible. From there, they dragged their equipment across the ice sheet and received additional supplies by parachute. After all that, they came within just 20 miles of their main objective. They still could not see the mountain through the permanent whiteout, and the expedition turned back without reaching it. That is what makes the Watkins Range worthy of number 3. Even reaching the outskirts once required almost every form of Arctic transport available, and the mountains still remained hidden behind ice, distance, and weather. From Greenland's highest mountains, where expeditions can still disappear into whiteout just miles from their objective, we now travel east into northern Siberia. Here, a vast mountain system stretches across the interior of the Taimyr Peninsula, with no towns, almost no roads, and entire sections that remained badly mapped into the modern era. This is mountain range number 2. The Byrranga Mountains are not especially tall. Their highest point reaches only about 1,125 meters, or 3,690 feet. What makes them extraordinary is that they continue for roughly 1,100 kilometers across the northern edge of Siberia, almost as long as the Alps, without a single permanent settlement anywhere inside them. They are the northernmost mountain system on any continent, surrounded by tundra, wetlands, and the Arctic Ocean. There are no roads through the range, and most journeys into its interior still depend on helicopters, boats, or long scientific expeditions. Byrranga first appeared in expedition records in the 18th century, but large sections remained poorly understood for another 200 years. Until the 1950s, geographers believed the mountains contained no glaciers. Then researchers discovered almost 100 of them hidden among the eastern ridges. Some of these are now recognized as the northernmost continental mountain glaciers on Earth. And the maps were still wrong. For decades, Mount Lednikovaya was labeled as the highest point in the entire range. Measurements taken in the 1990s showed that it was lower than believed, and that the real highest summit stood in a completely different group of mountains more than 100 kilometers or 60 miles farther east. That is why Byrranga reaches number 2. This is an 1,100 kilometer mountain system so empty that humans overlooked its glaciers and misplaced its highest point well into the satellite age. But for a few weeks each year, parts of this empty range suddenly fill with movement. The valleys between the Byrranga ridges form migration corridors for the Taimyr wild reindeer herd, the largest in Eurasia. Hundreds of thousands of animals can travel across northern Siberia, with individual migrations stretching as far as 1,500 kilometers. So one of the least populated mountain ranges on Earth occasionally becomes a highway for one of the planet's largest land migrations. From a Siberian range whose highest summit remained misplaced until the 1990s, we now travel deep into Marie Byrd Land, Antarctica. Here, enormous volcanoes rise from a region so completely devoid of human presence that it may be not only the emptiest mountain range, but one of the emptiest places anywhere on Earth. This is mountain range number 1. The Executive Committee Range may have the least adventurous name ever given to a chain of enormous volcanoes. The full range was first seen from an aircraft in December 1940 and named after the executive committee of the expedition that discovered it. Somehow nobody involved suggested anything more exciting. At its southern end stands Mount Sidley, the highest volcano in Antarctica, rising 4,285 meters, or 14,058 feet, above the West Antarctic ice sheet. Its summit is split by a caldera roughly 5 kilometers, or 3 miles across, large enough to swallow the center of a city. Mount Sidley is also one of the volcanic 7 summits, the highest volcano on each continent. But unlike Kilimanjaro or Elbrus, the real challenge is reaching it. Current guided expeditions cost between $77,000 and almost $100,000 per person before some international flights, insurance, and personal equipment. Most of that price pays for the specialized aircraft and polar logistics required simply to place a small team at the base of a volcano almost nobody visits. Yet despite belonging to the 7 volcanic summits, Sidley was not climbed until 1990. And even then, the first person on top was not part of a climbing expedition. The first non-government ascent came another 21 years later. The team landed on open ice about 16 kilometers from the summit, skied for 7 hours just to establish camp, and then spent 13 hours climbing around the crater rim. They initially thought they had reached the top, only to discover another point several meters higher, farther along the rim. That tells you almost everything about this place. Marie Byrd Land is considered one of the least accessible and least visited parts of Antarctica, and some of its volcanoes have still been studied only through brief reconnaissance. The range contains 5 major volcanic mountains: Mount Hampton, Mount Cumming, Mount Hartigan, Mount Sidley, and Mount Weishi. But Mount Sidley is the only one with a clear documented climbing history. As far as publicly available records show, there is no evidence that the other 4 were ever climbed at all, which is almost absurd for a mountain range on Earth in the 21st century. The Executive Committee Range may sound like somewhere people hold weekly meetings. In reality, it could be one of the emptiest places anywhere on Earth. After all of this, which mountain range surprised you the most, and which one would you choose to explore if reaching it was somehow possible? Let me know in the comments. Please subscribe, like, and comment because it tells the YouTube algorithm that remote and truly wild places like these are still worth exploring. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.